Alright, so in my indecision to play the next mainline Yakuza game I have in line, being 5, or Pirate Yakuza, the newest one in general that just looks so good, I actually found that you can get Yakuza Dead Souls for $20 off of PSN for PS3, which is a lot cheaper than 60 plus that a physical copy seems to go for. And to delay that decision of which game is next, I decided to play this one instead. Which is actually kind of funny because this game did actually come out in between 4 and 5, so I guess it is still kind of in order, albeit a third-person shooter zombie spinoff. And I was honestly pleasantly surprised. I really suck at shooters, and at least at the lowest difficulty that I played on, it was more than manageable. Almost like GTA in a way, where you sort of snap on to the nearest zombie, in this case without even having to aim or anything. And even when you aim, it snaps onto a particular weak point on the powerful zombie that you probably had to go into aim mode for. So it's just generally very approachable, especially if you're a fan of the series but not very skilled at this particular genre. I will admit one thing straight out that I think this game was a little better at, and that was the boss fights. I thought the boss fights were a little more fun than mainline to me here, with their, being an emphasis on weak points, or at least more than usual. The only complaint about the bosses that I can really think of is, I'm going to not spoil anything, but you do have a chain of final bosses in the last fight, and I'm not going to lie, I felt like the first phase was probably the most fun. It sort of, made the build-up of the later phases not hit as hard, I guess. But yeah, seeing Kamurocho, as I mentioned in other Yakuza videos, and as you've probably heard if you've looked into the series, it's a very well-designed, evolving area. Like I said, I've played enough of these games at this point that I know it better than sections of my own hometown. And to see this sort of unique take and some wacky evolution of the city, it was a lot of fun. I would almost like to see more of it. Like, I know they have a few historical Yakuza games, and I wouldn't mind for that, or even for the Fist of the North Star one they have, if you had an interpretation of Kamurocho as one of their main locations. I don't know if they do that or not, and I'm not gonna lie, there would be a little disappointment in me if they didn't do that. But this whole thing almost wonders what else they can do, like have a really futuristic one, or some sort of alien invasion, or I don't know, I'm sure there's other really good ideas more creative people can come up with. Something I find kind of funny with this game too is Kamurocho Hills or Heights or whatever it's called, that Majima in particular had been working on since Yakuza 2. This is kind of our first exposure to the more complete area there, which I just find kind of funny at the end of the day, that of all places you're going to first experience it in the zombie spin-off. Kamurocho is the only area, but it is open up a bit more like it was in 4, except you don't have the rooftops like you did that time. Something I mentioned about the previous 2 Yakuza games I played, 3 and 4, which would be the first 2 chronologically since I played the remake of 1 and 2, but I didn't feel like the sub-stories were as good in those 2. And part of that was, I feel like it was missing some of the unpredictable wackiness that some of the later ones I played had. Like, you really just never knew what you were going to get. And maybe this is where it all started, because that DNA was definitely here. I don't know if 5 will go as hard as it did here or in 0, because it was kind of in between in that. But we'll see. It definitely has me anticipating that section a little more, a little higher expectations, I guess. These games have so many mechanics, and I think I've mentioned before that sometimes I'll sort of ignore a mechanic but then pay attention to it later. This time around, the mechanic I finally got around to sort of messing around with, which made a lot of sense considering what this game is, being the crafting system for weapons, since it's a lot more central and just more core to the experience. And it wasn't anything too crazy, but it was nice to finally sort of see what they exactly do there, and to be able to, keep that in mind and maybe mess around with it in 5 when I get there, or whatever winds up being next. Admittedly, after this, I am leaning more towards 5 than Pirate Yakuza, but I don't know. The thing about mainline, though, is I just tend to use whatever items I find laying around. I mean, I guess you do have certain accessories and armor that would definitely be useful to mess around with a bit more. But I don't know. I have a hard time justifying the, melee or firearms, just because you have such limited use of them without, breaking or running out of ammo, and there's just not a lot of opportunities, I feel like, to really quick and efficiently repair or get more item without, just constantly going to the weapon shop. But we'll see. I've also noticed that I'm finally starting to get a lot of the gambling games. And this actually kind of started in 4, but up until this point, I was just kind of winging them, contributing a little bit towards, completion or an achievement without really going all the way. Just a little taste and progress towards more basic achievements. And the one thing that really helped me finally learn them is that before I was ignoring the cheat items that you would get throughout the games. I would just sort of throw them in storage and forget about them. And in 4, I finally remembered about them, and I did it again here too. And like I said, that was probably the best way for me to finally learn them and, take advantage of them to really up my available cash. We do have 4 protagonists again. It's a little different this time around, though, because this time they all share an upgrade tree. And the only thing that really sets them apart is they each have their own exclusive item, or weapon. At least, from a gameplay perspective. Ryuji's definitely sort of the big one they added here. I don't think this counts as a spoiler, because you can see it from, key art, box art, and all of that. But seeing Ryuji with a mechanical minigun arm, like, Ryuji was already a really cool character. I don't know how they made him even more badass, but they did. I want to say this may have been the first time Majima was playable. I could be wrong, and obviously sort of playing through 0 and Kiwami 2 beforehand, I've already played as him. But yeah, playable Majima is always nice, and Kiryu and Akiyama are still great too. This might be a small spoiler. It's about something that isn't in the game, being Saejima doesn't appear at all, which was kind of interesting since I know they brought him back as playable in 5. Does almost make you wonder, like, is this game set in between 3 and 4? And I didn't realize. And even then, if maybe they were sort of 4 in this were sort of developed alongside each other, and it almost makes you wonder, about Akiyama's origins. Was he sort of meant for one and sort of added to both, maybe? That would be nuts. That's just baseless speculation. I haven't really heard anything about that either way. The story itself, though, I mean, it's passable. It's not as good as the mainline stories, I will say. That may have been where, where a bit of the spin-off budget wasn't spent, which, hey, it's fair when everything else is solid. The only thing I can really think of to complain about with this game is some of the design choices, I guess, when it comes to the quarantined Camarocho. There is no quick travel, although unlike the mainline games, you don't have to really get worried about getting caught up in a random street fight. You can just sort of run past everyone. I would use one pistol in particular that felt like it was as powerful as a shotgun. I would just run by, just shoot around randomly, get a couple kills on my way to wherever I'm trying to get at, or maybe I would take on a couple of the rarer zombies if I, wanted more material or experience, especially earlier in the game. But I don't know, it can get kind of repetitive because you always go in from the same area. Especially, for example, if you were going for one particular achievement which requires you to have all of the partners available, which is something I kind of forgot about too. I mean, it's kind of there. You don't really have to do much with it, at least on the difficulty I was on, and how it would get in the way at times, honestly, because some sub-stories wouldn't trigger if you had a partner. Probably the ones that revolve around one of your partners, although I'm not 100% sure on that. It would make sense, though. Actually, maybe that's not a case, because I think it was also for the sub-story with the movie makers, and that doesn't involve any partners. Although, maybe I'm misremembering things. Regardless, you would need all the partners, which would include maxing out all the hostesses. And the one hostess club is like all the way on the opposite corner of the map of your entry point. And to get a call back to progress the hostess's story, you would have to exit quarantine. So you would be needing to go back and forth like 4 or 5 times. And there's 8 hostesses. Granted, that's kind of the extreme end of it, but that's just sort of one example. Like, I'll admit, even some of the early sub-stories with Akiyama, where you have to go through the one underground section over and over again to get to the main quarantined area where a lot of the sub-quests actually were, it did get a little fatiguing. And it doesn't help either. I remember another game recently I played that had an issue with this, was Little Kitty Big City, where it would make sense to have certain barricades for, a puzzle at a certain point in the game that you would need to solve to reach a new area. But it's like, after you do that, I kind of just wish they got rid of the barricade, because then you're just sort of taking the long way around over and over again. Can't think of the one side around the Millennium Tower and the bottom left corner of the map where you have the New Serenia and the big Camarocho gate as, being, particularly more difficult than they probably should have to get around and get to, just different locations. Still, definitely worth it for me, at least. I saw some, really mixed things, and going into this, I really wasn't sure how it would hit for me, but luckily it all went good. I guess a small side tangent, too, is because I played on a PS3, which actually reminds me of one other thing, too, is that there is sometimes a little bit of a slowdown in frame drops, which is something I rarely ever bring up, because I don't know why, but I'm one of the few people that doesn't really notice them or notice the difference between 60 and 30. But, there was points when there's just, a lot on screen that you could see it, chugging along. I don't know if it would have been better on RPCS 3. I did see mixed things about its compatibility, which is why I kind of played it on original hardware to begin with. But then I got my backup to put on RPCS3 to record my gameplay footage, since my capture card doesn't work with my PS3 for some reason. And for some reason, I never had a problem before, although I've only done this one other time with PS All Stars. I just could not get my save from the PS3 to work. I don't know if it's, because it was a digital game or because it had system data with it. Tried a few different things. I wound up just downloading a save I found online that was already complete, although it kind of messed me up a bit. Not that, like I said, I'm not really good at the game, but it took me a while in recording this to notice what the controls were, because they had a different controller scheme set than I did. Plus, I think they were at a higher difficulty that I wasn't, completely used to either. Not trying to make excuses. The gameplay would have been shit from a skill level, as per usual for me anyway. I just thought those were sort of some interesting notes.